Hello, everyone, and welcome to morning worship with a focus on scripture and message from First United Methodist Church, Wenatchee, for Sunday, March 22nd. Today we're looking at John chapter 9, verses 1 through 41. This particular chapter of John looks at darkness and light. It begins with Jesus healing a blind man. It's not the first blind man he's healed, or the first person he's healed, but in today's story, because those around him don't believe what they themselves can literally see, they're blind to this miracle in their midst, and the whole of the chapter becomes a deep lesson in learning to truly believe and see. We begin with the healing itself. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then the man went and washed and came back, able to see. Said the man, "I was blind, and now I see." Jesus heals this man blind from birth, on a Sabbath day, no less, and sets into motion layers of teaching that give life and meaning to the phrase, "I once was blind, but now I see." The disciples are there with him at the start. They hear the conversation between Jesus and the blind man, witness Jesus making mud out of spit and dirt and spreading it on the man's eyes, and ordering him to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. Given their experiences of Jesus, you'd think the disciples would be proclaiming the certainty of the healing, the miracle to come. But today their focus is not on whether or not the mud or spit will restore the man's sight. They want to know what caused him to be blind in the first place. Asking, is this man blind because of his own sin or because of the sins of his parents? Despite their learning and seeing and teaching and following Jesus in real time, old understandings die hard. The disciples believe, as most did in the day, that a person suffering from a physical or mental ailment was being punished for sin. And in their narrow, ingrained understanding, dove right into the pool of questions we often ask ourselves relative to what we don't understand. There are a series of questions that don't always make sense. It sometimes feels like it's more about scuttlebutt first, and grace and a leaning in and being present comes second or third or fourth or, well, you get the idea. The Gospel of John implies that after Jesus put mud on the man and set him to the pool, the disciples went on their way. As we walk together through today's reading, we'll find that the disciples don't encounter the man again until the end of the story, when newly sighted, this once blind man becomes a member of their community, the followers of Jesus himself. But for the moment, in their initial questioning, grounded in these long-held beliefs about sin and its perceived relationship to anything that's not the norm, sets the stage for the discourses to come in the remainder of today's reading, from neighbors, Pharisees, even the man's parents. For all of these, like the disciples, their main focus is to determine exactly who's to blame for his original condition. Seeing him as a human being, or just even seeing him at all, would have made for a far different story. But it would seem that Jesus has things to teach us through him. We continue with the story. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it's someone like him." The man himself kept saying, "I am the man. I was blind." and now I see." But they kept asking him, "Then how are your eyes opened?" Said the man, "All I know is that I was blind, and now I see." He went on in his answer, saying, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' And I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he, this man who did this thing?" He said, "I do not know. All I know is that I was blind, and now I see." The community's response is a curious one, even though this is someone they've known all their lives. Now that the man can see, some no longer recognize him, even when he repeatedly identifies himself to them. I wonder, what's preventing them from seeing, from making room for a possibility outside what they think they know and how they know him? With the exception of Jesus and the once blind man, all of the players in today's reading are locked in a particular story, a single understanding of who and how this one person should be, their understanding of sin in that context, and how they see themselves relative to him. But the thing is, a single story is never the whole story. Why are the neighbors unable to recognize this man now that he's no longer disabled? Well, like the community of disciples, not one of the man's lifelong neighbors celebrates this miracle or cries tears of joy for his healing or embraces him in love, at least not according to John's account of the story. Instead, they ask questions that bolster their own worldview. They're not invested in how the man feels or rejoicing with him because they cannot see past their version of what the story should be to who he is now and what they could be. Do we have difficulty seeing a change right in front of us? Have you ever been in a situation changed only to find yourself locked at a certain age or place in time, but those who only knew you when or who might seek to hold you in a space that they're more comfortable with? Why is it that we have such difficulty stepping into change? We who believe that people can be born anew. We who claim to be children of God, children of light. The answer really is, how can we not? Somewhere in us lies a balance that allows us to ask questions and also allows awe and wonder to have a place, so that the story we build is one that moves with us and includes God in the process. Let's go back to the story for a moment. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But we do not know how it is that he now sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." So now the parents have confirmed that their son was born blind and now he can see. But they know nothing of how that came to be. Then they distance themselves from their son because they don't want to be associated with the followers of Jesus. They're afraid this association will cause them to lose status in their community. So for the second time, the Pharisees called the man who had been blind, and they say to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man, Jesus, is a sinner." And the man answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that I was blind, and now I see." The Pharisees said to the formerly blind man, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" And he answered them, "I've told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? Because all I know is that I was blind, and now I see." Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, Jesus, we do not know where he comes from." And the man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. I was blind, and now I see." We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And again the man says, "All I know is that I was blind, and now I see." The Pharisees answered him, "You were born entirely in sin, and you're trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. And still he said, "All I know is that I was blind, and now I see." This whole discourse doesn't sit well with the Pharisees, and their response is that Jesus, by performing a work of healing on the Sabbath, is a sinner. And the healed man is a person who has chosen to give allegiance to a false prophet, a sinner who doesn't observe the Sabbath. They refuse to honor his testimony, reject that he has been healed of the sin that caused his blindness. They tell him, "You were born entirely in sin, and you're trying to teach us," with some level of indignation, and they drive him out of town, banishing him from the only community he has ever known. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, Jesus said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And the man answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me so I may believe in him." Jesus said to the man, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe. I was blind, and now I see." And he worshipped him. The formerly blind man is never named in this discourse, which suggests that the emphasis isn't on him specifically so much as it is on how we see, how we learn to see, or even if we do or will, whether we see ourselves as a disciple, a neighbor, a family member, a Pharisee, or the man himself in this story. I wonder what it is about ourselves that we hold so tightly to our stories. In thinking of what's happening right now in the world, fact and fiction are flying across the globe at a furious pace as we cobble together, each of us, our own take on the virus, COVID-19. We're used to our independence and not much for being told what to do, especially here in the US, and physical and social distancing come hard, especially for those who are asymptomatic or believe themselves to be so, or are not in the specified danger zone of predisposing conditions or being 60 years old or older. It's easy at this point to get wound up in what we don't know or what we think we do know, so much so that we miss what's right in front of us. It's hard to know what to do and what to think. And the reality that, like the neighbor's family and Pharisees in today's story, we might have to change our own and see beyond ourselves and acknowledge the struggle we often have to get there, no matter how many times the story is repeated. I was blind, but now I see. The formerly blind man has his story rewritten for him, albeit not in the way that I would have. I would have been like, wow, this is amazing. But that's evidence of what I bring to the table with my lens, my way of seeing. All those around him in the story are still stuck in their past and current belief systems. But now that the man can see, all of that's been challenged. And as he repeats his truth over and over again, it becomes more than a literal thing. He's exposed to stories that have been told about him for the whole of his life in ways he couldn't possibly have anticipated. We only know him as blind, the neighbors and community say. We don't recognize this man, so it didn't really happen, say the Pharisees. He is our son, but we know no more than that, say his parents. Leaving the man with only Jesus to turn to, eyes open and seeking what comes next. The remainder of the players here may or may not return to the way things have always been, but this man can't. His life has been changed forever. And to be honest, those who have seen or not seen him in the story are changed too, whether they know it or not. If we look at this in the context of what we're experiencing now on the globe, fingers in the dike of panic and uncertainty, I wonder when it's past, whether in a season or over the course of a lifetime, what will we take away from the experience? Will the forgiveness, the connectedness, the simplicity of living that we're stepping into, whether we choose to initially or not, remain? Will the awareness of the deep needs of those around us that exist, whether we're in crisis or not, hold with us as a new means of being in mission? Or will we be so certain of the story we came into this with that that's the one we will do everything we can to return to, as though nothing has changed? I don't know, but I do appreciate the words of Episcopalian elder and Choctaw native Steve Charleston, who puts it this way. It all seems so surreal. Everything has changed so fast. The world looks the same, but it feels different. The virus has made that happen. It has made us furtive in our own reality, as reality itself feels as though it has become, well, unreliable. Something has changed forever. The virus hasn't created that reality. It has simply revealed it to us more clearly. Things have always been changing. We can't stay the same no matter what we do. We are being born anew in this circumstance and in our faith and love and understanding that the other is us. And all of that happens in spite of ourselves. We can and are and will be the better for it. Says Jesus, I came into the world to bring everything into the clear light of day, making all the distinctions clear, so that those who've never seen will see, and those who've made a great pretense of seeing will be exposed as blind. Some Pharisees overheard him and said, does that mean you're calling us blind? Jesus said, if you were really blind, you would be blameless. But since you claim to see everything so well, you're accountable for every fault and failure. Jesus tells us if your eyes cause you to sin, pluck them out. A way of saying that when what we've seen keeps us from seeing anew, if if we pluck out our eyes, so to speak, if we blind ourselves to prejudging and commit to unknowing, perhaps in the process, I, you, me, might truly learn to see and truly say, Lord, I believe. I was blind, and now I see.